1. This is the Surly Grognards for June 2nd, 2014. This is Peter Bowman, and as usual, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
I'm doing alright.
It's June. Already.
Yeah, and it felt like it.
Oi!
Like it turned June and suddenly it was fucking hot out.
Yeah. So, tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about game design. Because neither of us are game designers and actually know anything about this.
So therefore, we are eminently qualified to do so.
To be fair, I've dabbled a little bit in it. I've done some game design stuff, but I cannot call myself an expert by any stretch of the imagination. But the reason we're talking about this is we got an email from Faradin, I think that's how you pronounced it. If I mispronounced it, I'm terribly sorry. Where he basically mentions that he's doing his first game mastering outing soon, and he wanted some help. The group he plays with knows the systems they play with very well, much better than he does anyways. And they tend to break things mechanically. He wrote up a brief prologue session for a Parasite Eve campaign, which they played in Savage Worlds, and he promptly decided afterwards that he needed to make his own system as, among other things, it let it make up stuff on the fly and no one would be the wiser. And then he wanted some input on the system itself, and how about you should go about designing and playtesting custom RPG systems. We'll probably touch back on the actual system that he's got described here a little bit later on, if we remember to.
You got about a 30% chance of that.
Roundabouts. But I thought this would be an interesting topic to sort of talk about, game design and sort of some thoughts on that. Again, neither of us are actually game designers, so
in any way, shape, or form.
No, not really.
I know a good system when I play it, but that's about it.
Right. My first sort of comment on this is, honestly, I don't think it's necessary for him in his situation to design a new game. A new system.
Although, if you're going to design a game, those kind of players are exactly what you want. You want guys that are going to break it over their knee.
Absolutely. This group sounds like a great playtest group, in all honesty.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a plus. But honestly, from a standpoint of wanting to be able to make things up as you go without anyone knowing the wiser, honestly, do it anyways. And
let people call you on it and go, yeah, it's my game. I'm making shit up as I go. That's part of being a game master.
I mean,
I'm sorry, does that make you upset? Would you like to run the game?
I mean, it's a case of, I think this is one of the situations that would be helped out immensely by, talking with the players and mentioning that, you guys know the system better than I do. If you could avoid completely munching out and, munchkinning out and power gaming the system, because I don't know the system as well as you guys do, and also understand that I will wing things from time to time, improvise and might make shit up on the spot. And if that's a problem, sorry, but, it's... So yeah, I don't think that's much of a problem. That said, wanting to design your own game is not something I want to dissuade you from either.
No, that it can be fun, honestly.
Design can be very interesting. My first, biggest, and most important piece of advice, honestly, and this is boring. It's a boring piece of advice. Is do some research into probability. Understand how how probability curves will be generated by whatever random number generation system you come up with, so that you understand what the likelihood of any given result is going to be. This is not an interesting thing to sort of, an interesting piece of advice in any way, shape, or form. But I think it's actually critically important. Because if you don't know, for instance, if you don't happen to know, like I do off the top of your head, that the odds of rolling a 10 or less on 3-6 is exactly 50%.
I didn't know that.
Well, I do. But I mean, it's one of those things I've picked up over the years. But 10 or less is a result of 10 or less in 3-6 is 50%, which means that it's a great benchmarking thing to know.
Yes.
So if it's something that's supposed to happen half the time, it means that no, that means it has to happen on a 10 or less, or on an 11 or greater, either or.
Yeah.
Um, so
So yeah, researching a bit of that is
knowing the likelihood of what's going to come up in the system you choose is important, because that allow you to actually choose choose benchmarks for where things are likely to happen, and so you can choose how often the players are going to succeed on individual given die rolls in typical situations.
mm,
Um, so I think that's my first piece of advice. Any other thoughts on that though?
keep it simple, stupid.
For your,
That's a vitally important thing when it comes to designing a game. Like there's unnecessary complexity is the bane of any good system.
yeah, I'd say that unnecessary complexity definitely.
Yeah. There's
This,
nothing wrong with complexity, but keep removing stuff until you've got it down to what is necessary to get the effect you want.
yeah, I'd agree with that definitely.
It's like I imagine it's like sculpture.
I could see that. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, you just keep on shaving bits of clay. Sometimes you shave off too much, but you know what? It's a rule system. You can always put that bit back on.
Right. So yeah, yeah, definitely. Especially on your first attempt at a system, keeping things simple is definitely important.
Yes.
The other thing I would definitely say, something else I'd definitely say is that when you're starting the system off, design in sort of the same vein, design the most bare bones thing possible first.
Mm.
Uh, Worry about adding these sort of more details and such on top of it later. So you make sure that you've got a solid core of what you're trying to build. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Trying to think of how to. Am I making sense with this, Eric?
Yes, I think so. I'm sorry, I'm distracted by a GIF.
So, well, I mean, so yeah, it's one of those things that it's like, I'm trying to think I'm trying to think of a good example of sort of how to explain what I'm talking about. Okay, a prime example, I guess a way to sort of describe it is basically, if you're designing a combat system, come up with the most simple, straightforward, basic part of combat and design that first.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the fancy maneuvers and stuff that you want to layer on top of it, that you want to have there also first. Make sure the basic mechanical resolution of the most basic elements of combat work before you work on anything else.
Yeah, basically to hit a target and to damage a target.
And however you end up deciding you want to do that. There are a
Yes.
lot of different ways to handle that.
10,000 different ways to do that.
And similarly, if you're building your skill system, same thing. Take just the basics of it and build out from there.
Yeah. If you can somehow integrate the two, I find that works the best, honestly.
Yeah, that works really well for a lot of systems. There are some systems which don't do that, and it works out okay.
Right.
But keeping a single task resolution mechanic is probably the easiest thing to do, especially for your first game.
Yes, and it keeps things consistent. Also, like everyone knows they need to hit a target number of some sort. For
Right.
example,
Exactly.
whether it's the amount of fives that come up on a fistful of d6s, or skill plus stat plus 2d6, or what have you.
Or your D20 plus modifiers trying to exceed a difficulty number, etc.
Yes.
Also, my other big piece of advice is to, honestly, for your first system, this is actually something not even just for your first system. but try to keep it so that a bonus is a bonus is a bonus.
Yeah.
What I mean is that you're always trying to roll in the same direction. So,
Another example of early Dungeons and Dragons sins.
yeah, Thaco. Basically,
You really want to roll high, except when you want to roll low.
right, and I mean, as a general rule of thumb, that's definitely a big plus.
Yeah.
So you basically, that's the big change from second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons to third edition Dungeons and Dragons was that second edition rolling to hit you wanted to roll high, but your skill checks you wanted to roll low,
Yes.
and then your saving throws you wanted to roll high. And it's like it's not hard or bad, and it doesn't change the probabilities or anything like that. But it ends up being something of a confusing mess, especially for it's just not as intuitive.
Yes.
Whereas in third edition, you always wanted to roll.
You
high.
always wanted to roll high.
High
Big
is
was
always
good.
better,
Yes.
and that's fine. I mean, having it be the other way around, have it always rolling low is not inherently a bad thing either. It's just you have to make that decision.
Yeah, maybe you just want everything to be lower, and everything, instead of bonuses, are negatives to the die roll, so that the lower you get, the better.
Right. And that's actually an important thing to keep in mind. I think rolling high is an easier thing to wrap for you. It being good is an easier thing for people to wrap
Yeah,
their
it's more
brains
intuitive,
around.
certainly.
It's definitely more intuitive. And so that's one of the things. As it means that that you can basically phrase things that things that are good for you are always positive. They add to your die roll. And things that are bad for you are negative in a way, subtract from your die roll. And that is just intuitive for the way most people think. Now, here's the thing. In a system where you are trying to roll low, I would still phrase the bonuses as being positive. But just make sure you're making sure that it's clear that you're adding to they are increasing the number you're trying to roll equal or less than. Because the thought it's just simply because the phrase "I have a -2 bonus" just throws people off. So honestly, I would basically that's sort of a general sort of thing. But again, my personal recommendation would be stick with roll high. It's just easier to wrap everyone's to wrap their head around.
Yes. No, I'd agree with that assessment.
I would also say that, especially if it's at all possible, stick with one type of random number generation throughout the game. And by that I mean ideally stick with one type of die for most for task resolution if you're using dice, or if you decide that you want to use playing cards, stick with those. Don't combine the two, not because you can't get interesting effects if you do, or if combining different types of dice, but for your first system, try to keep it to one type of thing because that will limit the amount of fiddling with probability and that you have to do.
Goes back to keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. Basically.
It is unnecessarily complex to combine the two.
Right. Now, there are a lot of interesting effects you can get from combining different types of dice and adding them together.
Yes, and that can be pretty cool. I believe that's what Fantasy Flight is doing for their current Star Wars system.
Right. But
and like you said, you can get a lot of interesting neat effects that way.
But again, if you're designing your system, this is your first system, so I would shy away from that. Also, honestly,
it's a neat idea, but it requires too much fiddling with probability and whatnot.
Right. But again,
too much math.
That's basically
simple addition and subtraction. We're talking like calculus craziness here.
Yeah. The other thing I would definitely say is this is a matter of my personal opinion. This is purely opinion based, but I would definitively make sure you have if you're designing a game which combat is going to be a thing at all. Work on your combat system. Make sure it is fair and effective,
And fun.
and ideally yes, and fun.
I mean, obviously that's what you're shooting for with this at all. It is a game. Fun is supposed to be a factor here.
Right.
But
The thing is that the reason that that so many RPGs focus so heavily on combat mechanics is that is the place where the game has to be fair and balanced
yes.
and work. And that's where it has to be most mechanically sound, because that is the place where
people get most frustrated.
exactly that it's not just frustrated. It's the place where you don't want to have to lean on somebody to make an objective. You don't want to have to lean on the game master too much to make an objective ruling on things. Unless you've got a really experienced game master and the group, you can have a game system which doesn't have very detailed and complex combat rules. But the more not detailed and complex, but solid and balanced and mechanically sound. You don't need to have that. I mean, Ember Diceless has no actual raw mechanics, for example.
It also puts a lot of weight on the game master.
It does, but there are still mechanics in there, despite the fact that it is not really a mechanical system.
That's true.
That said, I mean, so basically, the reason is I'm trying to think how to phrase this properly, but so much of
combat
role-playing
feels unfair. That's where people are going to start complaining the most.
Right.
If the players feel like they're just steamrolling things too easily, they're not going to feel challenged. They're getting their asses kicked all the time, and it's from a mechanical point of view, then they're going to get frustrated and quit. Or rightfully so.
Or if they can't predict, like if there's no way for them to predict what's going to happen in a combat at all. That's going to be, I mean, it's going to be a problem. If it's entirely based on the whims of the game master,
there's no strategy. They can't think tactically about the situation.
They can't plan.
Yes.
And so I don't think that having a really heavily well-designed combat system is going to inhibit role-playing, because it really shouldn't. And the reason the meat of most modern role-playing games, most role-playing games, not just modern, but most role-playing games, is the combat system, because that is the area where the mechanics have to be.
Yes.
You don't need mechanics to role-play, to act, to pretend to what your character is going to say and do and think. You need mechanics to, unless you're going to pick up like weapons and beat each other up with them, and that's not role-playing, that's beating each other up. That's fighting.
That's LARPing.
Yeah.
And even LARPs have mechanics,
Right,
to determine this sort of stuff.
So, unless you're actually getting into an actual fight, you need to have a mechanical resolution to adjudicate what happens in a fight if one comes up.
Right.
And so it's basically you need rules for task resolution, and combat is a task.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the one where it needs to be the most balanced and fair for everyone to feel all right with the way things are going, basically.
Right.
It is the place where most contention can come about, in my opinion.
Yes, easily. And it's hard enough trying to balance encounters for a group with a new system, without the system being fundamentally flawed and unfair.
Right. So I would definitely focus at the start on combat resolution and task resolution overall. I know nobody's asked this, but I personally am always very leery of having rules to adjudicate role-playing. Like,
it feels unnecessary.
I mean, there are a lot of there are but like it's one of those complaints I've seen about various games that this game doesn't have rules to help with role play, and I was like, but you don't need rules to do that.
It's completely unnecessary. I mean, you don't need. I mean, this goes back to our two discussions on alignment, where it's completely unnecessary. It's a whole section of rule. There's several pages that could be cut to either make the book cheaper, add more flavor for your world, or expand on your rules with either further examples of weird stuff that could happen, or what have you.
Right. Um. Yeah. There are a lot of there have been games which have like rules for social interaction, like mechanically, and
Oh,
I
sure, and I'm fine with that. Like,
to a degree, yeah.
I'm fine with like the seduction skill existing.
Well, yes.
I'm fine with the negotiation skill and that sort of thing.
Right.
Or diplomacy. That's fine. That's cool. Because guess what? Maybe you're not like friggin' James Bond. James Bond Dean.
Right.
I mean, you're playing a game so that you can be James Bond Dean, even though you're Eric Schmucko. So
Right. So yeah. After that, after you but yeah, I think that sort of covers the basics of that. I'll get into. We'll talk a little bit about possible different types of random number generation in a bit. But the other thing I do want to talk about is at some point you're going to have to sort of decide how you want players to design their characters.
yes, and that's where players are going to. That's what that can make and break a system, or make or break a system for me. How much fun is character creation?
Right. And you can keep it incredibly simple if you want to.
Feng Shui, an incredibly simple system for character creation. Pick an archetype, boost whatever sets of stats, go.
Right. Iron Kingdoms is also very simple and straightforward for creating your character.
Yes.
But I mean, basically, the question is whether you want to break down to how much freedom you want to give the players to design what the character they want. And that sort of breaks down to effectively the divide between basically class-based systems and point-based systems, effectively.
Yeah.
And that is entirely...
it's entirely up to you.
Yeah, it's...
Some genres do better with others. Superhero games, for example, beg for a point-buy system.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you can make a good case for having sort of basing it on archetypes, like you can go
like
around
the
blaster,
speeder,
brick,
the speedster, the brick, the blaster, that kind of deal.
The martial artist, etc. The unpowered normal, what have you. But and fantasy often will. There's a reason a lot of fantasy games have either classes or careers or what have you.
Because it's building off of...
You're building off archetypes.
Yeah.
Off the classic story archetypes. And both are perfectly valid ways to do things. And from what Faradin's talking about, the advice for him directly, I would probably lean towards doing something archetype based, because that means that you are limiting the amount of choices your players have to create their characters, which means it's a little bit harder to abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are able to use it, it's easier to spot where it's happening.
Yes.
So you can adjust things.
However, if you're going to design your own system, these are the guys to do it from your email.
Yeah.
You want these guys to take the system, break it over its knee, and point out how these imbalances show up.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm not entirely certain what type of game you're building. So there's a lot of...
Yeah, I haven't played Parasite Eve. I'm familiar that it was a video game system, a video game from like PlayStation 2, if I remember correctly, but I didn't play it. So
yeah,
believe it came out around the time I was buying all the Armored Cores. So
Well, the important bit, I think it's sort of basically it's sort of modern urban horror, basically, if I remember
right,
correctly. But
yeah,
that
they're with like mutants and weirdness and whatnot.
I honestly don't remember too much.
Yeah.
I have a copy of it. I just never got around to playing it. I think it's like right here by my. It's like right by my desk, actually. I've got a desk with a bunch of PlayStation. One of my drawers of my desk has a bunch of my PlayStation 1's games in it.
Mm.
And let me take a quick look here. Nope, nope, nope. Let's see. Parasite Eve. There we go.
Aha!
I have a copy. It's a PlayStation 1 game. RPG survival horror mix is what Max Rage says. Yeah. So, on it, but again, that's whatever you want to have happen. I mean, so from there, but from what we've described so far, then you moving on to, so if you, for instance, you're doing a fantasy game and you want to have magic in the game, you have to decide how powerful you want magic to be and how widely available you want it. And that's getting back into that whole sort of world building thing which we talked about. That's more tailored to the world and less to the system, I think. And it becomes basically, if, for instance, if you're running if you were making a game for a fantasy world and the world is tied to the system, you have to decide how powerful you want magic to be and how prevalent, as I said. So is it something that is like everybody can do a little bit of, and really powerful mages can, or and people who know lots of magic can use more powerful magic or what have you, or if it's just available to everybody, or if only certain people can learn magic and how powerful it is, etc. These are all things you have to decide.
Or maybe magic. Anyone can use magic, but almost no one does because of the investment of time to get good at it required.
Right.
It's like anyone can learn engineering. There aren't a lot of engineers out there.
Right. Exactly. And from there, deciding on how you want to design the magic system is that gets. I mean, that's a basically you have to decide exactly what sort of effects you want magic to be able to. This applies to anything. Yeah. Honestly, you have to if it's something that's not like just your basic mechanics, like what effects do I want this thing to do, and how do I want to represent them in the game? And again, we go back to the same basic things we were talking about before, which is know the mechanics, know the probabilities you want to have happen. Start off simple, build outwards. And try to keep it relatively balanced. With it, try to keep, at a minimum, even if you want magic to be more powerful than non-magic, that is a valid design choice if you want it to. Want to have it as long as you go into it knowing that, and the players know that, and the game is designed around that.
Everyone's playing a mage of some sort that channels magic, and that you could have an entire game built around different types of mages or people that use magic differently. Like someone who channels magic in a physical way, and they basically become superheroes. And you got another one who's an artificer. He makes doodads and whatnots, and you've got your classic battle wizard and all the other stuff.
Right. So I mean, that's a perfectly valid way to do things. I mean, or you could have something like Ars Magica, where mages are just more powerful than everybody else.
Yes.
But the game is built around that, so every player has their mage character, and then every player has a couple of companion characters, and there's a group of of the sort of schmucko fightery types. And then every session is broken down, built around, every sort of adventure is built around one character, one player's mage. Two other players are playing their companions, who are the companions of that mage, and then everyone else divvies up the grogs is what they're called.
Right.
And the next adventure is someone else's mages, someone else's companions, and so on. And then every now and then you have a session where it's just sort of like a meeting of all the mages who are sitting around talking about what their coven is going to do. Yes, and Rio Planeswalker says, Eric, you're describing Mage the Awakening. Yes, he is.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't spend a good portion of my high school career playing White Wolf games. No, not me.
Eric played a lot of White Wolf games.
Played a lot of everything in high school, but yeah.
Fair enough.
A lot of White Wolf, a lot of Shadowrun.
Yeah, my high school was God. It was I played God. High school was D&D, GURPS, Hero Champions, and then dabbling in a bunch of different systems here and there.
Mm.
I played some James Bond. Played some. I played MERP. We.
I
Um,
think like the sheer ridiculousness of the generic White Wolf game where everyone's playing a different kind of supernatural entity.
oh, that can lead to very interesting things and some very interesting problems.
That was, yeah, that was crazy.
So yeah, but yeah, so the important thing to note is that I would ideally you want to make sure that the core mechanics of everything is roughly similar. Having an entirely different set of mechanics for magic from psionics, from melee combat, from what have you,
Hmm.
it adds a lot of flavor, but it makes things really, really difficult on you as a game designer to keep things remotely in tune with each other.
Yes.
Um,
A magic system I like is I'm gonna go back to Iron Kingdoms. Still love Iron Kingdoms. The idea that magic is really simple to throw out. It's just a quick action to throw out a spell, but it's taxing, and yeah, you can throw out two spells around, but you tire yourself out pretty quickly. And the idea of, yes, magic is common and relatively common and powerful, um, but its utilities are limited to actual physical objects.
right.
You're not You can throw a fireball, or you can like make a supercomputer for your steam-powered robot, but using magic. But you're not using magic to like sweep the floor.
Right. So yeah, but again, that's sort of a decide
Or
what
to
you want.
disassemble the wall, keeping the players away from all the stuff.
Right. Again, it depends on what you want and how.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I'm not personally a fan of the way Magic is balanced in basically virtually any version of D&D prior to fourth edition. I think Magic is a little bit too oomphy. Although,
You know what? Problem with Magic in every edition of Dungeons and Dragons up till fourth edition was I suck, I suck, I suck. Okay, I finally put in my time. Now the game's all about me. That that is how mages worked.
that's less true in third edition.
Yeah.
And that was something they intentionally were trying to do. They were trying to make it so it was more fun to play mage at low levels, but they weren't as overwhelmingly powerful. Except they were.
Yes. It was a noble experiment.
Honestly, the really weird thing is that a lot of things they did in third edition to make things more balanced ended up breaking some of the balance they had in second edition.
Yeah. Honestly, I like third edition best at low levels, below level 10.
Well, yeah, it is. It's definitively best below there.
Yeah. Level 5 is about where things feel right for the game. Where the power levels feel balanced and good for everybody involved.
Yeah, but yeah, the interesting thing is, I mean, having just finished up playing a lengthy second edition AD&D game, the interesting thing we found is that throughout the course of the game, we didn't get to really high levels, so this breaks down after a certain point. But even through a significant chunk of the game, like the fighters still felt powerful. Even at the end of the campaign, we didn't get past level 9 really, but the mage, we're not like the mage. Our party mage wasn't outstripping, or wasn't like way more powerful than everybody else. We desperately needed her in the party, and she was incredibly useful, and she could do things no one else could do. But the fighter's ability to deal out damage was important.
Mm.
And that is not so much the case in third ed after a certain point, because it's easier to survive as a mage after a certain point, and
Yeah.
your toolbox is so much better, and it's much easier to craft scrolls and such to allow you to have your complete toolbox of stuff without having to memorize spells all the time, etc. Blah 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 blah.
I always hated the memorized spells mechanic. hated that system.
It's tedious.
It's tedious. I always felt it was unrealistic. Why would the spell erase itself from my mind when I'm flinging
Because it's
magic? And
magic.
yeah, I know I'm talking about friggin' throwing magic missiles and fireballs and whatnot. I'm talking about realism, but it it broke my sense of disbelief.
Basically, the way it effectively works is that you are pretty much you're memorizing spells as you're pre-casting spells, with the exception of the final keywords to cast the spell.
I guess that. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
That description makes more sense to me.
Yeah, that's basically
But
how it works. That's not how it's actually just directly worded, but that's effectively what's happening. So the whole like lengthy period of time you spend in the morning memorizing your spells is doing stuff you can't do during combat to get the spells ready, except for the final linchpin keywords that you can't say during combat.
that makes more sense. But it was always been described as sitting there reading the spell book until you get everything right, and then you actually go and cast the spell. And yeah,
It made more sense for the clerics too, because they're asking their gods to give them the ability to cast these spells.
yes.
But honestly, the biggest problem is the
That
bookkeeping.
the clerics I thought made sense because you're asking for divine favor.
Right. The really weird thing is that it's mechanically the same, and I
Yes.
normally like that, and I do like that, but the amount of bookkeeping that it requires it slows things down far too much for my tastes. And again, this is a matter of taste. How much bookkeeping you want for this is entirely up to you and your players.
Yeah. I'm kind of two minds about bookkeeping. One part of me just wants to throw it completely out of the out. The other part of me feels it's really important.
Yeah, from a flavor standpoint, I understand why people really like keeping track of stuff like how much food they have, food and water they have to make the trip, and how many arrows they're carrying,
Yeah.
and all this stuff. I personally find it immensely tedious, and I just could not care less
Yeah,
about it.
that kind of shit I throw out. But like keeping track of how much money you have, because that's a way of measuring success, and also a way easy way to determine whether or not you can buy that new piece of equipment or what have you.
Right.
I mean, you can abstract that to all hell, and several games do that, where you instead have like a wealth um a wealth stat that you roll against to acquire new equipment. And I like that too. I think that's actually a great way to do it.
Yes.
Some people like the actual accounting involved.
Yeah, and
I
that's
can't fault them for it.
no,
get
I
it.
can't either. I don't fault them for it. It's no, I'm good at accounting. I mean, it's part of my degree. I'm an economics major. I understand accounting. I don't like accounting in my game. Well, sort of. There are certain types of account. Yeah. But there's just little things I'd rather just like. I'd rather focus on doing stuff and actually role playing, and less on
Yeah.
the keeping track of the little nitty gritty details. That's just me though. That's personal taste.
An entire session shopping can be fun once in a while,
Yeah.
but you shouldn't do that more than once every 10 sessions. I prefer 15, but
It'll vary by group, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so from there, I do want to talk a little bit about choice of random number generation.
yes.
Technically speaking, you don't have to have random number generation.
Yeah, you can just have blocks of raw stats, and if this beats that, in the end.
Right.
That's how it works.
Amber Diceless has proven you do not need random numbers in a role playing game at all. That said, for most people, you're going to want that, because in theory it is guarantees that it's going to be fair and balanced. And the number you roll on the die is not adjudicated by the game master. It's what you
Yes.
rolled on the die.
And quite honestly, something we're looking for. Ember Diceless is the only one game that I know of that did this successfully.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I can't think of any other one that did it well, or that lasted at all on the market.
Right. Yeah. someone in the chat asked which game proved it. It was Amber Diceless role-playing game. It's based on the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny. If you have not read the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny, go read those books. They're really, really good.
Do it right now.
Well, after the show, but...
Yeah. Fine. Be that way.
All right, so, but back to choosing what type of random number generation you want.
There's so many different ways to do this.
Honestly, it depends entirely on what sort of probability distribution you want. Honestly, the two most basic versions out there that I've seen are either effectively percentile based or a bell curve, creating a bell curve. Percentile based is exactly what it sounds like. Is you're trying to generate a number effectively between 1 and 100. Now, let me let you know a little dirty secret here.
Reduced down, which is what Dungeons & Dragons does at the D20.
D20 system is percentile based. It's just the graduation in the percentiles is in 5% increments.
Yes.
Bell curve is if you're rolling multiple dice and adding them together.
Or just looking for whatever result on the dice. Shadowrun and Iron Kingdoms both do this.
Right. So does
different ways.
So does GURPS and Hero System. They use a 3-6 curve. I'm not going to go into details of what that entails, but basically, if you take the distribution of the results from the dice you're rolling and adding together and plot them out, it'll form a little sort of bell-shaped curve, where the most likely results are in the middle and they tail down off on either side.
I personally preferred bell curve systems to percentile. But
I do too. I do too. I prefer bell curve for the most part. The advantage of percentile based is it's much easier to see immediately how much of an effect a bonus or penalty will affect you.
Yes,
because it is a direct. So if you're running on a 1-to-1, if you're running a pure percentile system, so you're rolling 1 to 100, 1 to 100. If you have minus 10 to your roll, that's minus 10%. You're 10% less likely to succeed. It's really simple.
Yes.
On a D20 game, a minus 1 on your roll is minus 5%. Really simple. Minus 1 on a 2-6 on a 3-6 curve, not as simple because that depends on where your current chances of success are.
Yes.
How much I will adjust it by. I like that personally. I like that effect. I think that's a really good effect.
Yes, I like that effect. It feels more natural to me.
Right, but it's hard. It's not as intuitive as to how much that effect is until you've actually done it a lot.
This it's actually is a big reason why I prefer Warhammer Hordes to say 40k or fantasy.
Right.
Warhammer 40k or fantasy.
Right, because they're using straight d6s and they're not creating a curve. It's a straight line from results from 1 to 6.
Yes. Well, that extra 1 point of defense or 1 point of armor can make all the difference in War Machine.
Right. So yeah, picking the
and subsequently Iron Kingdoms, but
right. So I would say definitely picking between those two. Those are the two I'd recommend most for most game designers, especially starting out. Honestly, percentile base is the easiest. You might want to go with that, but if you like the bell curve, go with that. You can achieve similar effects with cards if you want to go with that.
Like the old Deadline system,
right? Which no longer uses that, but
that's why I said the old
Deadline
I know. I'm
system.
just saying.
So yeah, I going with one of those two. Well, basically, again, it depends on what sort of effect you want to go with. Just keep in mind that the probabilities for the way modifiers affect the probabilities of results having is very different between the two, and pick the one you think will work best for your game and for the feel you want. From there, honestly, I think the most useful thing we can talk about is playtesting.
Yes.
Okay, here's the thing. When you hand the system over to people to playtest with you, what you want them to do is to build to find the ways to most break the game. Either in terms of making their characters far too powerful or far too weak.
Mm-hmm.
You are stress testing the game, looking for ways to make the system not work. So that you can then, on the next iteration of your rules, make it better.
Yes.
Playtesting is a process of try, fail, do it better, try again. fail again, improve, try, fail again, try. It's a tedious and occasionally painful process.
You just said two words that are the same thing to me: tedious and painful.
They're not technically the same thing, though.
They may as well be to me, at least. But yeah, no, playtesting is... In any active creation, you're going to have to do this. And yeah, playtesting is just how you do it with game design. Which means you pick up you take your baby, you hand it to people to break, and they hand you back the shattered pieces, and you glue them back together and try to make it stronger.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to hurt.
It will. I promise you it will hurt.
It is entirely necessary, but it's going to hurt.
Nothing you design from the outset will be perfect. And honestly, even after you're finished playtesting and you're done with it, it's still not going to be perfect.
Yeah. Because even with the best playtesters in the world, once it gets out in the world, someone's going to see something that they missed.
This is the thing that a lot of people miss about like published games. And they go on about how could they possibly miss this? Well, their playtest group was a finite number.
Yes.
And now it is in the hands of a much larger finite number, which increased the odds of finding something that someone in the smaller finite number missed. And they're going to miss something. That said, if you're writing a game...
are fallible, this will happen.
Right. If you're writing a game for...
I mean humans in general.
Right, yes, exactly. If you're writing something for your group, though, that's less... If you're just writing it for your group, that's much less of a problem.
Mm.
Because honestly, if you're writing it for your group, you're basically trying to write it and get it balanced to the point where it is what you and your players are going to enjoy.
Yes.
And that's what's most important for what you're doing, for that. If you're looking to actually publish, after you've got the point where you and your players enjoy it, give it to people that aren't in your group to try. And then have them write down their experiences and send it back to you. And make sure that you and no one in your group is involved in playing that game. Because what you will find is that things that you thought are very clear are not to the other group, because you're not there to explain them, and it's not written in a way that you and your players understand each other. This is something I actually know from fact and from experience. This happens.
I suspect this is part of the problem with a lot of Games Workshop's games.
Oh yeah, they're written in ways that I'm certain what's happened is that they're written in ways that the design team and the playtesters understand, and the wording is what's clear to them is not clear outside there, and there are a lot of things that they think is obviously there but isn't, and that happens in every game.
Yes, this is actually something. Once more, I sing Privateer's praises. When they were working on Mark II of War Machine and Hordes, they actually publicly released the rules,
right,
to their players. You could go and download the PDF, and all they asked is that you send back inconsistencies or stuff that wasn't clear or things that would break the game.
Right,
and they'd update the rules every few weeks. And people would go and play with these new rules and see what happened and how things worked.
Right.
And yeah, Mark II ended up being a much better game than Mark I. It's not to say it's not perfect. That's perfect, because it's not.
Right.
But
nothing is. That's the thing. Is so. Yeah, ideally, if you're making something that you're actually trying to publish, the bigger your playtest audience, the better. Bigger your playtest group, the better, because it means that more people are looking at it, and more people are going to find things that are wrong and find inconsistencies and find things that are not worded in the way that they understand. I think, but yeah, basically, again, also don't take the feedback personally.
It can sometimes be hard not to.
Yes,
but you have to try to remain dispassionate. As a guy who went to art school, trust me, there's nothing worse than having what you thought was your fucking awesome ass painting and have your teacher and your class rip it to shreds critically.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I've taken writing classes and the same thing. It's just
it hurts.
It does.
It's better at your job, but it hurts.
It does. The other one last little important thing. Sometimes you'll get feedback that is wrong.
Yes.
Now, in the case of this is not clear, or like they misunderstood this, that probably isn't wrong. It means that you were not clear in some way, probably, and that you could probably improve your wording. But if it's a case of this is I didn't like this, I thought this made the game bad, that can be wrong. And I want to say this I want to make this very clear. It is possible for opinion to be wrong.
Yes.
This is something that a lot of people will probably think I'm crazy for saying, but it's true. It is possible for some opinions to be objectively wrong. Specifically in this case, what I'm talking about is, I didn't like this, it made the game less fun. The problem is that the thing that they're talking about is part of what you're intentionally trying to engender in the game.
Yeah.
I didn't like the magic system because it made mages too powerful. The point of this game is mages are more powerful than everybody else. Your opinion is invalid in this situation. I'm not designing a game where mages are just as powerful as fighters. I'm running a game where mages are more powerful. Similarly, I'm writing a game. I didn't like this. Mages are not powerful enough. Magic should be more powerful than everything else. Well, that's nice, but the game's intent is that all the archetypes are balancing against each other, and while that means it's not the game for you, and that's fine, that doesn't mean I designed the game wrong.
Yeah, and one of the things that really gets to me, and this is just on a broader scope,
Yep.
is my opinion is just as good as your facts.
Yes.
And I see this fucking everywhere, and it infuriates me. But keeping on scope of game design, yes, sometimes people will try to make their opinions as valid as your facts. And this is, when it comes to game design, you tell them to shut the fuck up.
Well, you don't tell them to shut the fuck up. You say, thank you for your input.
You will now ignore it.
and then you ignore it, yes. Thank you. You may say that that's not the angle I'm designing for. Keep that in mind in future playtests.
Yeah. The trick is to know the differences between harsh but valid criticism and invalid opinions. Because that can be a really fuzzy thing sometimes.
Yes, definitely. And honestly, err on the side of diplomacy. And err on assuming that the players have found a flaw.
Yes.
So
err on assuming that they did find a flaw and this is a problem. Try doing an iteration with it and taking a step back and see the overall shape of it.
right.
If it changed the shape outside of what you were going for, then remove it again.
Right. Now, it's also possible that it changes the shape of what you're going for, but everybody prefers it.
Yeah. Then that's something else entirely.
Yeah, or it may change. It's like, okay, my group loved this. These people didn't like it. I don't think they're right, but I'll change it, see what happens. And then your group tries it, and they prefer to what you had before. You may want to consider going with it because it might mean that your group prefers something you didn't expect.
Yes.
So yeah, right. I think that covers it. I think for the most part, it covers most of what I want to talk about at least.
Yeah, pretty much.
I
This is us giving advice on things that we don't know about.
I said I've done a
Our
little bit.
opinions are just as valid as your facts.
Yeah. Again, this is all basically my opinion, and
Yeah, this is all theory crafting on our part.
I said I've done a little game design. I've done play testing. I've done a bunch of this stuff.
Yeah, I've done some playtesting. I've played more than my fair share of games. And I like to think, anyway, have a decent grasp of how things work. But
we are not professional game designers.
we're not even amateur game designers.
I'm closer than Eric is. I've designed games, but I've never really gone too far with them.
Yeah.
So take this with as much salt as you deem necessary.
I'd say 3% less than a lethal dose.
That would be advisable, yes. So before we wrap things up, I think I want to read over the system the guy was talking about, Faradin was talking about, just so we can get a feel for what he's aiming at. So the idea he had for the system is whenever players attempt something, they roll 3 dice: a core stat die, a physical die, and a skill die. The total across the dice tells you if they pass the check or had a critical success or failure, while the number in each die tells you how they pass the check, if applicable. Okay. Magic would use an element die instead of a physical die, which has a cooldown bar, which is shared across all the magic skills. You can only cast in 0-1 cooldown slots. At the start of every turn, you lose 1 cooldown. Okay, interesting. So, for instance, if you want to shoot an enemy, roll an agility die, a combat aptitude die, and a gunplay die. If you want to cast Barrier, you roll a Constitution die, an Earth die, and a Barrier die. Okay, so there's a different type of die for each type of school of magic, I guess. If you succeed normally, you'd have 3 to your cooldown bar, blocking you from casting for at least 2 turns.
I think what I'm interpreting this is not that there's a different type of die for each thing. It's your skill in that type of magic determines what die you roll. Like, say, a die 6 or a die 8 or a die 10.
Yeah, I think that's definitely probably the case, but...
Yeah,
players level up by buying better dice for their stats, elements, and skills. Enemies get flavor by what combination of dice they roll. Status effects can cause players to roll weaker dice or lose certain ones entirely, etc. Okay.
This sounds like a really interesting system. The probabilities involved, I don't even want to think about doing the math on.
Right. So, this is going to take some work on working on it's going to take a lot of work on working out the probabilities of things working and success. So, definitely do research.
I like the concept of it, but there's going to be a lot of math involved.
The only thing I'm a little concerned about, honestly, there's that, and the cooldown bar is a neat idea. I think it's going to be a little bit clunky in play.
Yeah, that might be a little unnecessarily complicated.
That sounds like something that would work really well in a computer game, and less well at the tabletop.
Yeah.
That said, it's interesting. It's going to take a lot of work, basically, is what we're saying. But designing a game is going to take a lot of work anyways, so...
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
If it were easy, everyone would do it.
Of course, he says... He wraps up by saying, of course, I'm open to suggestions, both for how I can improve the system. I can't give you advice on that. That requires design and playtest.
Yeah.
Or just a system that I could use that isn't GURPS, Savage Worlds, Cthulhu, D&D, or another system this group knows too well for their own good.
I don't know too many... How do you feel about Hero System?
Yeah. Hero System is the only...
I would not even think about running Hero System. I played Hero System. I don't even want to think about trying to run it.
Yeah. Honestly, that's the last sort of generic / universal system I know off the top of my head that could handle something like that, and it would do what you do. I think it would do a Parasite Eve game pretty well, but it takes a lot of work.
You could try adapting Shadowrun.
Yeah,
because it's a modern horror game with magic. You just remove these cyberware complications from Shadowrun. That might work.
Yep. Yeah, basically take a look at a bunch of different systems and see if there's anything out there that sparks your idea of how to adjust it. I would recommend Feng Shui, but that sounds a little bit too... The players are probably a little bit too badass.
Yeah, if you're doing a survival horror game, you don't want to do Feng Shui.
No. Yeah. Also, as I said at the start of the show, honestly, don't worry too much about the players knowing too much about it. Talk with them about it, see if you can get them to tone down their power gaming, and let them know that you might have to improv rules here and there because they know the system better than you do. And if you do, don't get upset about it, just roll with it.
Yeah.
But designing your own system...
I always describe these things as more confrontational than necessary, but...
Yeah, honestly, don't worry too much about it. That said, designing your own system sounds like a lot of fun and something interesting to do, so give it a shot.
Yeah, I encourage you to try your own system, man, and I look forward to hearing about it. But yeah, probably a lot more work than you think it is. Like almost everything is.
Yeah.
Almost any active creation of any sort, it's more work than you think it is.
So yeah, we had one other question, but we've kind of run out of time for the week.
I'm actually surprised we talked so long about this.
Yeah. So I think we're going to wrap things up here, guys. Thanks everyone for listening to Type. I hope everybody had a good time and learned something. Hope we were useful in some way, shape, or form.
Probably not.
Yeah. If you have feedback for us, or if you have questions you'd like answered on the show, we try to save time at the end of each show for questions, although we don't always succeed. Or if you've got suggestions for show topics. So feedback, questions,
those.
show topics, we love all of those things. They're all fantastic and wonderful and great, and we encourage you to send them in to us. You can send them to us at our email address. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com, surlygrognards@yahoo.com. Or you can find us on our forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com. We've got a place there to post stuff, so feel free to post there. Or you can just hit me up on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @mechagm. That is also where I will post information about when the show's going live, if we have to delay or what have you, or if we're going to have to punt for a week. You can find early recordings of the show on mechagm.blogspot.com, or you can sort of crawl through the past broadcasts on twitch.tv/mechagm, which is where we record the show every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern here on twitch.tv/mechagm. Woo. That's Eastern time, by the way. I think that's it for this week, though.
I think that's it, yes.
Excellent. So, until we see you guys next, keep on gaming, guys. Take care and have a great evening.
Bye.